Hi, I'm Sophia Carter, and this is the story of how I learned the hard way that sometimes the people you trust most, your family, can turn out to be your biggest obstacles, especially in business. For a decade, I poured every ounce of effort and energy into our small family-owned tech company, turning it from a struggling startup into a $55 million enterprise. But success, I learned, doesn't always inspire joy. Sometimes, it stirs jealousy in those who should be cheering you on. It all started years ago when our family business was nothing more than a modest computer repair shop in a rundown strip mall. My dad had started it 2 decades earlier, and even though it barely managed to pay the bills, he treated it like his life's masterpiece. Back then, I was the quiet one in the family, not exactly the star child. That role belonged to my older sister, Laura. She was the golden girl, the one who brought home straight A's, went to an elite business school, and was always the center of Dad's attention. Meanwhile, I stayed behind, helping Dad at the shop while pursuing a computer science degree at a local college. My life might not have looked as glamorous as Laura's, but I saw something in that little shop that no one else did: potential. Every now and then, Laura would drop by during her breaks from school, always with a cutting comment or unsolicited advice. "Sophia, you're wasting your potential here," she would say, shaking her head like she pitied me. "You should aim higher."
But I didn't see it as a waste.
While Laura was busy learning about hypothetical business strategies in her ivory tower, I was gaining real-world experience, writing code, understanding the tech industry, and spotting opportunities others missed. During my final year in college, I developed our first piece of proprietary software. It wasn't anything groundbreaking, just a simple, user-friendly tool to help small businesses manage their inventory. But it worked, and it was affordable, which made it a hit with local businesses. At first, Dad was skeptical. "Do you think this will actually sell, Sophia?" he asked, his tone cautious. "I know it will, Dad. Just give it a chance," I replied, hoping to convince him. When the sales started rolling in, his attitude shifted. I'll never forget the pride in his voice when he finally said, "Maybe you're onto something here, kiddo." Hearing those words from him meant everything to me back then. If only I had known that his approval would be fleeting. Over the next few years, I worked tirelessly to grow the business. 14-hour days, 7 days a week. I poured my soul into every line of code, every project, every pitch. While Laura climbed the corporate ladder at a fancy consulting firm in New York, I was in the trenches, transforming our little repair shop into a budding software company. By the time we hit our first million in annual revenue, I finally felt like I had achieved something real. But that's when Laura decided to re-enter the picture. At a family dinner, she dropped the bombshell. "I've been thinking," she began, casually twirling her wine glass. "It's time I took my rightful place in the family business." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. My rightful place? Was she serious? I had spent years building this company from the ground up, and now she was swooping in to claim credit? But before I could say anything, Dad beamed with pride. "That's wonderful, Princess," he said, his eyes lighting up. "We could really use your professional touch around here." I sat there in stunned silence, my fork suspended in midair, trying to process what had just happened. Laura was appointed as co-CEO alongside me, despite having zero experience in our industry. Dad insisted it was for the company's benefit, saying her credentials would impress investors and clients. I swallowed my objections and tried to make it work, focusing on product development while Laura took charge of marketing and investor relations. The next 5 years were difficult, to say the least. While I continued to innovate, creating new software solutions and building client relationships, Laura became the public face of the company. She gave interviews about being a trailblazer in tech and accepted awards for entrepreneurship, all while taking credit for the hard work my team and I had done. Our revenue soared to $55 million annually, but so did the tension between us. Laura started excluding me from key meetings and making decisions without consulting me. Slowly but surely, I found myself being pushed to the sidelines of the company I had built with my own 2 hands. The breaking point came on Dad's 60th birthday. Laura had insisted on throwing him a grand party, renting out the ballroom of the city's most luxurious hotel. It was more of a networking event than a celebration, But that was Laura's style. Everything she did had to serve a purpose. I arrived early to help with the preparations, wearing a simple black dress. As soon as Laura saw me, she wrinkled her nose in disapproval. "Couldn't you have made more of an effort?" she whispered sharply. "These are important people, Sophia." I bit my tongue and focused on greeting guests as they arrived. The room filled quickly with business associates, clients, and family friends. While Laura worked the crowd like a seasoned politician, I stayed in the background, making sure everything ran smoothly. During dinner, as the room buzzed with conversation and clinking glasses, Laura stood up and tapped her wine glass with a spoon. The room fell silent, all eyes on her. The moment Laura stood up and clinked her wine glass, I thought I knew what was coming. A heartfelt speech, maybe a tribute to Dad, and a few warm memories of our childhood. Instead, what came out of her mouth sent shockwaves through the room and shattered my family dynamic forever. "As we celebrate Dad's 60th birthday tonight," she began, her voice confident and carrying effortlessly across the now silent ballroom, "I think it's the perfect moment to announce some changes at Chin Technologies." I froze. Changes? At the company? The words didn't make sense at first. My stomach knotted as I struggled to comprehend where this was going. Then Laura's next sentence made my heart stop. "The board has agreed," she continued, flashing a self-satisfied smile, "that the company needs unified leadership to move forward." "Board meetings? What board meetings?" The pit in my stomach deepened as she delivered the next blow, her tone sharp and calculated. "For too long, we've been held back by outdated thinking and resistance to change," she said, her gaze locking on me. "That's why, effective immediately, I will be taking over as sole CEO. It's time for certain elements that are no longer serving our growth to step aside." The murmurs began almost immediately, a low hum of shock and confusion rippling through the room. But Laura wasn't finished. No, she had planned this moment to the last detail, and she wasn't going to stop until she'd buried me. "Some people," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy, "are better suited to technical roles rather than leadership. My sister Sophia has been adequate in maintaining our legacy systems, but to compete in today's market, we need vision. We need excellence. And frankly, Sophia, you're just not cut out for this level of business." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I turned to Dad, hoping, no, praying, that he would put a stop to this madness. But to my horror, he was nodding along, pride beaming from his face as if Laura's words were gospel. Mom, meanwhile, sat with her hands trembling slightly, her eyes fixed on her plate. She didn't say a word. Laura wasn't done yet. "The truth is," she continued, her voice rising, "Sophia's old-fashioned ideas and lack of proper business education have become the liability. It's time for her to step aside gracefully." The silence that followed was deafening. Hundreds of eyes turned to me, some filled with pity, others with judgment, waiting to see how I would respond. Everything I had built, every late night, every sacrifice, was being stripped away from me in front of my colleagues, family, and friends. It was humiliating. I stood up slowly, the chair scraping against the floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the grand ballroom. Everyone watched, expecting a scene, tears, an outburst, maybe even a heated argument. But I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. Instead, I walked over to Dad's table and placed a small wrapped package in front of him. "Happy birthday, Dad," I said quietly. Then I picked up my purse and walked out, my head held high, leaving behind the whispers and stares. That night, I sat in my home office, surrounded by the awards and patents that bore my name. They were tangible reminders of everything I had achieved. Laura might have stolen the spotlight tonight, but she had underestimated me. She thought she'd won, but she had no idea who she was dealing with. That night, as I powered up my laptop and started typing, a small smile crept onto my face. Tomorrow, everything would change. The next morning, the sun rose on a bright, clear day. I arrived at the office early, long before anyone else. The air was thick with anticipation, but I remained calm. Everything was already in motion. At precisely 9 a.m., Laura strode through the front doors with Dad by her side. Their triumphant smiles would soon be replaced with something much more satisfying: shock. Sophia? Laura's voice was a mix of surprise and irritation. What are you doing here? I thought after last night, you'd have the dignity to stay home. I smiled, keeping my tone light. Just tying up some loose ends, sister dear. But since you're here, we should probably discuss the company's future. There's nothing to discuss, Dad interjected firmly. Laura's in charge now. The board has already approved it. The board, I said, pulling out my tablet. Let's talk about that. While Laura was busy planning parties and giving interviews, I was actually building this company. And there are a few things you both seem to have forgotten. I walked into the conference room, pulled up a document, and displayed it on the large screen for all to see. First, let me remind you that I own 51% of Chin Technologies shares. Laura's face fell. That's impossible, she stammered, her voice shaking. Oh, it's quite possible, I replied. When we incorporated 10 years ago, Dad split the shares evenly, 25% to me, 25% to Laura, and he kept 50%. But 3 years ago, when we needed capital for expansion, Dad sold me an additional 6%. Remember that day, Dad? You were too busy attending Laura's awards ceremony to handle the negotiations, so you signed the papers without reading them carefully. Dad's face went pale. Laura's hands gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. That's not all, I continued, pulling up another document. The core software that generates 80% of our revenue? It's not owned by Chin Technologies. It's owned by my separate company, Innovate Solutions, LLC. Chin Technologies only has a licensing agreement to use it, a licensing agreement that, as of 10 minutes ago, has expired. Dad slumped into a chair, realization dawning on his face. The renewal papers, he began weakly. The ones you asked me to sign last week. Yes, those papers, I said, my voice steady. The ones you didn't bother to read because you were too busy helping Laura plan the party. I decided not to submit them. The silence that followed was almost sweet. The triumphant smiles Laura and Dad had worn that morning were gone, replaced by looks of disbelief and fear. Laura's face twisted with fury, her usual polished composure cracking right in front of me. You underhanded little. Careful, sister, I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. You might want to hear the rest before you finish that sentence. It might save you some embarrassment. I watched her struggle to suppress her anger as I continued. While you were busy announcing my so-called graceful exit last night, I was working. I sent emails to all our major clients. You see, most of them sign their contracts with Chin Technologies because of me, my expertise, my reputation, my track record. They trust me, Laura, not the company. I turned the conference room's large screen toward her, revealing my email inbox, which was already flooded with responses. Would you like to know how many of them have already triggered their termination clauses? Or how many of our top developers, who, by the way, are employed by Innovate Solutions, not Chin Technologies, have already accepted offers to join my new venture? The room fell deathly silent. Through the glass walls, we could see employees gathering in clusters, whispers spreading as they checked their emails. Laura's icy composure finally shattered. She grabbed her phone, scrolling frantically, her fingers trembling. You can't do this, she stammered, her voice a mixture of disbelief and panic. You mean the company you tried to steal from me? I said, my tone sharp. The one you thought you could take over just because you have an MBA and Dad's approval? That company ceased to exist the moment you decided to humiliate me in front of everyone we know. I stood, adjusting my dress as I addressed both Laura and Dad, who looked like he had aged a decade in the past 10 minutes. Here are your options, I said, keeping my voice steady. Option 1. I walk away with my shares, my software, my clients, and my employees. Chin Technologies becomes an empty shell overnight. You can explain to all those important people you invited to last night's party why the company's value has suddenly plummeted to zero. Dad's face was pale, his voice weak as he asked, and option 2? Option 2, you both resign. I take full control of Chin Technologies. You keep your shares as silent partners, receiving dividends but with no say in operations. Laura gets a nice severance package and glowing references for her next job. Preferably somewhere far from here. Laura's face turned a deep shade of red, her voice shaking as she spat. You planned this all along, didn't you? You've just been waiting for the perfect moment to stab us in the back. I laughed, but there was no humor in it.
No, Laura.
I spent 10 years trying to be a good daughter and sister while you both took me for granted. I built this company from nothing while you collected accolades for my work. I didn't plan this at all, until about 12 hours ago, after you called me worthless in front of everyone we know. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with another email notification. Another client had terminated their contract with Chin Technologies. I glanced at my watch. Time's running out. So, what's it going to be? The next hour was a whirlwind of paperwork, phone calls, and tense discussions with lawyers. By noon, the room was empty except for me. I sat at my desk, now my desk in what was officially my office. For years, I had dreamed of this moment, being in full control of the company I had poured my heart and soul into. But instead of triumph, I felt a hollow ache. The cost of victory had been steep. That evening, Mom came to see me. Her eyes were red and puffy, her face drawn with sadness. She sat down across from me, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Did it have to end this way? She asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. They gave me no choice, I replied, my voice gentle but resolute. They would have taken everything I built and thrown me aside like I didn't matter. She nodded slowly, tears welling up in her eyes. I just wish, her voice trailed off, and she looked down at her hands. I reached across the desk and placed my hand over hers. I wish things were different too, Mom. But I can't let them take advantage of me anymore. She sighed and gave a small nod. What happens now? I turned my monitor toward her, showing her the plans I had spent years developing, new product lines, expansions, innovations I had been holding back on. Now, I build something even bigger. But this time, I do it without having to carry people who see me as worthless. Over the next year, Chun Technologies flourished under my sole leadership. The company tripled its value, driven by the new strategies and products I introduced. Laura found a job with a startup in Silicon Valley. I heard through the grapevine that she had been humbled by the experience, though I wasn't sure if she had truly learned her lesson. Dad retired, finally understanding that his blind favoritism toward Laura had nearly destroyed the legacy he had worked so hard to create. We still saw each other during the holidays, but the wounds ran deep. Our conversations were polite, but the distance between us was palpable. Sometimes, late at night, I would look at old family photos and feel a pang of sadness for what we had lost. But then I would remember that night at the birthday party, the way Laura's words had dripped with disdain, and how Dad had nodded along as if he agreed with every cruel thing she said. In business and in family, respect isn't given, it's earned. They had to learn that lesson the hard way. My story spread quickly through business circles, becoming a cautionary tale about underestimating the wrong person. At industry events, I would often catch people whispering about me. That's Sophia Chun, they'd say. The one who, they never finished the sentence, but they didn't need to. My success spoke louder than any words ever could. Last week, I received an unexpected email, an invitation to speak at the graduation ceremony of Laura's business school. The topic? Hidden strengths, the power of underestimated leaders. I accepted the invitation without hesitation, already drafting my speech in my mind. After all, I had quite a story to tell. These days, I focus on building something meaningful, something that will outlast all the petty jealousies and family dramas. From my office overlooking the city, I often reflect on the lessons I've learned. My mother's words echo in my mind. Success is the best revenge, but wisdom is knowing when to stop seeking revenge and start seeking growth. She was right. I've moved past the need for revenge. Now, I focus on creating a legacy I can be proud of. I still keep the wrapped birthday present I never gave Dad, a photo album chronicling the company's journey from that tiny repair shop to what it is today. Maybe one day, when the wounds have healed enough, I'll finally give it to him. Until then, It serves as a reminder that our greatest strengths often come from the things others underestimate about us.